All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We are looking at a genuinely thrilling intellectual showdown today between two radically different thinkers who tackle the exact same, seemingly impossible problem: the absolute limits of human language. We're going to be exploring the groundbreaking research of Dr. Michael M. Nikoletseas from his book Parmenides in Apophatic Philosophy. He completely reframes how we look at ancient thought, specifically focusing on two titans, the ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides and the much later mystic Pseudo-Dionysius. Thousands of years ago, both of these guys stood at the exact same intellectual crossroads, staring into the ultimate unknown. And yet, the solutions they came up with to conquer that unknown, literally polar opposites.
So, think about this for a second. It's a pretty universal human experience. Have you ever had a thought that was just so profound, or maybe witnessed something so incredibly awe-inspiring that you simply couldn't put it into words? You try to explain it, and everyday language just feels messy. It's totally inadequate. I mean, everyday language is fantastic for survival, right? It's great for asking for directions or ordering a pizza. But when it comes to absolute truth, or trying to grasp the fundamental laws of the universe, our words kind of fragment reality. They're full of biases, contradictions, and shifting definitions. When we actually try to describe the indescribable, our language just hits a massive brick wall.
Now, philosophers have a very specific term for this exact brick wall: the ineffable. It comes from the Latin word ineffabilis, meaning unutterable. Basically, it refers to any reality that completely escapes our ability to describe it. What's fascinating here is how Dr. Nikoletseas frames this. He argues that the ineffable isn't just some spooky, mystical void. If you look at it from a natural science or neuroscience perspective, it is a structural inevitability. It's what happens when a cognitive system, like our human brain, tries to process a reality that operates on a much, much higher level of organization. It just can't do it. Our everyday words fail because they literally aren't built to handle that level of complexity.
So what exactly do you do when natural language fails? Well, let's look at path 1, the scientist.
Our main protagonist for this first path is Parmenides of Elea, writing way back around 500 BCE. Now, for centuries, traditional philosophy has painted Parmenides as this mystical guy. But Dr. Nikoletseas makes a super compelling case that he was actually an early pioneer of the scientific method, desperately trying to figure out a way to describe the invariant laws of physics. His whole philosophy revolves around a Greek concept called tuion, which usually gets translated as being with a capital B. But Nikoletseas argues something groundbreaking here. Tuion is actually a modus cogitandi. That's a mode of thinking, a formal language. Parmenides figured out that everyday speech is just too flawed. So, to really understand nature, he proposed a replacement language, a proto-formal system, very much like the mathematical equations physicists rely on today. So, tuion isn't some mystical object you can touch. It's the flawless logical code we need to decode the universe. And what is so incredibly cool about this is how perfectly his system maps onto modern science. In his famous poem, Parmenides gave this system very specific attributes. He said it was ungenerated, imperishable, continuous, invariant, and symmetrical, like a perfect sphere. For the longest time, people thought he was talking about some magical invisible ball floating in the sky. But think about these traits. They read exactly like the foundational rules of a mathematical formal system or even computer code. A formal logical calculus doesn't have a birth. It doesn't die. It's continuous with no logical gaps. And it's invariant, meaning the rules don't change depending on where or when you use them. Parmenides was basically laying out the conservation laws of modern physics. Which leads us right to one of his most famous surviving lines, Fragment 8. He says, "It is the same thing that can be thought and that can be." For Parmenides, if you want to conquer the ineffable, you have to build. You have to actively construct a perfect, rational, mathematically sound logic. Why? Because a flawless logical system aligns perfectly with the structured, invariant reality of the natural world. He truly believed that if the human intellect is armed with the right formal tools, we can absolutely reach the truth.
But what if the intellect itself is the actual problem? Let's shift gears completely to path 2, the mystic.
Enter our second titan, Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. He was a Christian theologian writing roughly 1,000 years after Parmenides. Just to quickly contextualize how we get here, Parmenides proposed his formal logic around 500 BCE. But by about 300 BCE, Plato and the Neoplatonists had taken his ideas and basically distorted them. They turned his rigorous scientific method into a highly mystical, metaphysical theory.
So by the time Pseudo-Dionysius sits down to write his masterwork, De Mystica Theologia, around 500 CE, he's inheriting this really twisted, overly intellectualized version of Parmenides. Dionysius wants to connect with the ultimate reality, for him, God or the divine cause, and he realizes that all this layered, convoluted human philosophy is completely getting in the way. So Dionysius makes this incredibly radical, just astonishing choice. Remember, Parmenides said, everyday language fails, so let's build a new perfect language of logic. Dionysius steps in and says, everyday language fails, and you know what? So does logic. So let's just abandon cognition entirely. He becomes the champion of what we call Apophatic Philosophy, the method of negation. His whole thing is that you don't get closer to the ultimate truth by adding concepts or building fancy logical equations. You get there by stripping away everything you think you know and stepping completely blind into what he called the divine darkness. Just listen to this quote from his text. He literally tells his readers to abandon cognitive faculties and sink into the darkness of unknowing. That is a massive, aggressive left turn in the history of human thought. I mean, the Greeks prized rationality and the illuminating light of the intellect above everything. But Dionysius demands a total, absolute surrender of the mind. He's essentially arguing that to know the ultimate cause of everything, you have to be willing to embrace knowing absolutely nothing. Dr. Nikoletseas maps out this Dionysian method, and it really resembles a profound psychological regression. Step 1. Shed all the knowledge you've ever acquired through your physical senses. Step 2. Completely abandon logic and all mental concepts. You literally untie yourself from your own thoughts. And step 3. You enter the total darkness of the unknowable. It's almost like deliberately stepping into a sensory deprivation tank where all human cognition is just washed away. Nikoletseas even compares it to Freud's psychoanalytic concept of regression. You are pushing the mind all the way back to a primordial state of nothingness, practically mimicking death, just to unite with the divine. And that brings us to the real climax of this explainer, the great philosophical antithesis. This is where Dr. Nikoletseas' textual analysis just blows the doors off things. He discovered that Dionysius wasn't just writing in a vacuum. De Mystica Theologia was written as a literal, deliberate antithesis to Parmenides' poem, Peri. Physeos. Dionysius was actively reading the Parmenidean tradition and methodically, point by point, negating the whole thing. So the biggest takeaway here is that these two incredible thinkers stood at the exact same crossroads of the ineffable, but they walked in completely opposite directions. Parmenides gives us the scientific impulse. When we face the unknown, we have to build a rational, formal system to elevate our minds and grasp the truth. But Dionysius gives us the apathetic mystic. When we face the unknown, any system we try to build is just another human illusion. So we have to reject all our cognitive faculties and let the truth reveal itself in silence. You can really see this dynamic when you compare their specific views side by side. Take human senses, for example. Sight, hearing, touch. Both of them fundamentally agree that our senses deceive us and can't give us the ultimate truth. But the conclusions they draw from that? Total polar opposites. Parmenides says, because our senses are flawed, we have to rely absolutely entirely on strict, abstract, formal logic. Dionysius says, well, because our senses are flawed, our entire grain is flawed, so we actually need to abandon both our senses and our logic. And the exact same mirror image debate happens with language. Parmenides thinks the problem is just the type of language we happen to be using, so his solution is to invent a flawless mathematical calculus. Dionysius, on the other hand, believes the flaw is in the very act of speaking itself. He thinks every single time you try to name God or the ultimate truth, you inherently limit it. So language isn't just useless, it's an actual trap. The only way forward is to embrace total apophatic silence, where the scientist says build, the mystic says strip away. But there's this beautifully ironic twist to Dionysius' approach. Look at this number, 27. In the original Greek text of De Mystica Theologia, Dionysius uses the prefix hyper, which means over, above, or beyond, a staggering 27 times. He unleashes this absolute flood of superlative adjectives and intensely dramatic, exuberant language to make his point. It is basically philosophical rococo art. He uses this intense, almost overwhelming excess of human language, all to passionately advocate for absolute silence. He literally has to use the exact tool he's trying to destroy just to point us toward the ineffable. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're kind of left staring at that exact same magnificent brick wall that Parmenides and Dionysius faced. The ineffable is still out there. The limits of our everyday language are still very, very real.
But thanks to the brilliant lens provided by Dr. Nikoletseas, we can clearly see the two distinct cosmic paths laid out for us by these historical titans. So I'll leave this entirely up to you to think about. When words inevitably fail you in the face of something truly profound, which path makes the most sense? Do you become the scientist and build a rigorous, flawless new logic? Or do you become the mystic, let go of the intellect entirely and willingly embrace the dark?